is Rebecca Adams, and you're watching Free to Soar. I have Becky Vermeer with me, and she has a new role that she has taken on. Now, don't
Well,
laugh.
first of all, let me say this. Hello.
There you go. She's got to do her Mrs. Doubtfire, and I love it. It always makes me laugh. So, what is your new role that you've been asked to do?
Well, I don't know that much about it, honestly, because I had the initial conversation, got some of the details, made the agreement, and said, yes, this is something that I am interested in pursuing, and we're waiting to get some stuff put into place. But I have joined the Safe House Board of Directors
Woohoo!
as the outreach chair.
Oh, I love it. I'm
Yes,
excited to
they
hear
did
what all
a
that
really
entails.
nice. Do what?
I'm really excited to hear what all that entails.
I know, me too. They did a really nice Facebook post and welcomed me to the board, and it's also on their website. So you got to check that out.
Awesome. Post it on my page if you would.
Okay,
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
I can do that.
Awesome. So, do you have anything down there on your desk that maybe you'd want to show us?
I have a cough drop. You want to see it?
Well, sure. We would love to see what kind of cough drops you use.
I'm not showing you a cough drop. I do have a pair of socks that I'll share with you.
There you go. Yes.
Okay, is that what you were indicating?
That's what I was referring to. Yes.
I see. Well, honestly, this is an appropriate pair for the evening because this pair of socks says sarcasm. Now served, now served all day.
The perfect pair of Becky socks if I ever saw one. Oh my goodness.
What about you? What you got hanging on your ears tonight?
These are from, have you ever heard of Premier Jewelry?
I have actually.
I just love this pair. I don't know if I can
Oh
get it to
yeah.
where you can really see them, but they're three. Of course, they're fake pearls, and I know that. But then there's a jangle of several different silver rings. Trying to get it to where you get a good idea of what it looks like. They're beautiful. They're called Colette.
Pretty, yeah.
Yeah.
Colette.
Yeah. So Premier Jewelry is middle of the road. So it's not your super cheap stuff that you get at your local whatever store. And it's not the high end stuff like you would pay for at I don't want to name names, but at a really expensive,
Fancy jewelry store.
Jewelry store, yeah. So, but I did learn that the first thing we do when we get home at night is to take these off, and they should be the last thing that goes on us before we walk out the door. And then I have this.
Oh yeah.
And
Oh, that's pretty.
I just wanted to put it on. This is, give me a second, because oh, I can't think of the name all of a sudden. $5 for this ring. But notice on the back, it's stretchy.
Oh yeah, that's cool.
So I mean, they look super elegant and very expensive. $5. Yeah.
That's
love
a good price.
Yeah, and because these have little fake pearls in them, and this it just kind of matches, and it goes with the fake lace and stuff that's on here on my shirt. So it doesn't take much to entertain me, as my son says.
I'm laughing because you're calling everything fake. This is fake. This is fake. This is fake.
The hair is real, though.
Well, that's good.
Yes, yes. So I wanted to ask you tonight a couple of questions. One of them is, what kind of interaction have you had with abusers? Either maybe observing them in court or coming directly to the crisis center or anything from A to Z. What
Mhm.
kind of interaction have you had?
I've had multiple interactions with abusers. Um, if you want to say from A to Z, I've had positive interactions all the way to not so positive interactions, all the way to this is a really bad interaction. Like I've had straight across the board. Um, I will tell you, and we've talked about this before, because domestic violence is about power and control, and the victim of domestic violence typically is the object of the abuser's power and control, I am not it. And so a standard interaction that we would have, let's say an abuser shows up at the crisis center on our property. And I've told you this part before. I feel like we have abuser radar. Like I don't know how we do it, but we're inside the office and all of a sudden somebody's like, that car's not supposed to be here. And so me or someone will go out and investigate it. And the times that I've gone and investigated, I walked up to the abuser and I said, hey, is there anything excuse me, can I help you with something? You know, I don't have any reason to be a jerk. It's just a person on the property. And because I'm polite to the abuser, those types of interactions, the abuser is polite back to me. And it's typically saying, hey, I'm just looking for my wife, or I'm just looking for my girlfriend. I'm worried about her. I want to make sure that she's safe. She has our daughter with her, let's say, and I want to make sure that she has money for diapers or money to buy gas for the vehicle or whatever it is. And so I'm just concerned about her. So then my standard response will always be, I'm sorry, I can't confirm or deny that person's presence in our shelter. And if the abuser is familiar with the vehicle that his wife drives, let's say, and this has happened before where the abuser has pointed to the vehicle and said, well, I know that that's my wife's car. And so I know that she's staying here. My response back to that would still be, I'm sorry, I can't confirm or deny anyone's presence in our shelter, and I can't discuss whose car that is. Well, I just want to make sure that she has gas for the vehicle or diapers for the baby, let's say. So here's what I will say. We have a message board that we post messages in the office, and you're more than willing to leave a message for her if you'd like to leave a message. I'll even provide you paper and pen if you'd like to do that. The one scenario I'm thinking of, the person said, yes, I would like to leave a message. Wrote the message down on a piece of paper, handed me the piece of paper, and then I said, this is private property, so now I'm going to have to ask you if you would leave the property. And that abuser left. So that's one interaction that I've had. Way back when, back in 1907, when I first started working at the crisis center. And during that time, we used motel placement as our chief means of shelter. So we actually had we had an office that was a double wide trailer that we had residents come to. Like we had support groups there, and they could come and do the laundry. They could come and use the kitchen if they wanted to, or come for crisis intervention and case management, etc. But none of our residents actually stayed in that building. So I had an abuser show up one time, knocked on the front door, and I went and answered the door. A similar conversation. I'm looking for so and so. I'm sorry, I can't confirm or deny that person's presence in our shelter. Well, I know that she's staying with you guys. And I said, again, that's not something that I can discuss with you. Now, this particular abuser wanted to go through conversations with me about how he was the nice guy, that he was just trying to check on her, that, and let me step back. He did have alcohol in his breath during the conversation. And he said, and I've been going to counseling. I've been going to counseling for my drinking. And my abuser or my counselor told me, I really don't have a problem with drinking. It's okay if I drink a little. So I don't know why she thinks it's a problem. And it started to get a little bit uptight, talking about his wife and the fact that she had left and trying to justify his behavior to me. And actually, what he was trying to do at that point, he was trying to prove to me what a nice guy he was. So because I am a polite person and I have no reason to be rude to this gentleman, I entertained the conversation for a little while. But then I did the same thing. Again, I'm sorry, I can't confirm or deny that person's presence here, and this is private property, so I'm going to have to ask you if you'll leave. And he left. So a lot of interactions that we have go that way. when we first acquired the property that we have, there were people in the community that were concerned that we were going to have abusers ride into town in all hours of the day or night and shoot the place up and create havoc and chaos and all of that. And that is not the norm. The norm for the area that I'm in is, hey, I just want to make sure that she's okay. And I get the nice public persona most of the time. Now, there have been times where we've had abusers show up on our property. An instance I can think of, the actual resident, someone knocked on the door, the resident opened the door, it was the abuser. The abuser pushed his way into her cottage and then refused to leave. So there was verbal argument going on, yelling back and forth. The resident actually left the cottage, came to the main office on the property, and said, my abuser's out of my cottage and he won't leave. So the advocate that was there at the time grabbed the phone, just in case she needed the phone, and went down there to talk to the abuser, and then said, I'm sorry, but you cannot be here. This is private property. That particular person decided to get a little belligerent and say, I'm not leaving unless I'm leaving with my wife, and kind of started to create a scene. So the advocate said, I'm going to ask you one last time, politely, I need you to leave our property. If you don't, I'm going to call the police. He said he wouldn't. She called the police. The second that she called 911, he left. So 911 did respond, and then they kind of circled around the area for a while. I had that happen to me, was last summer. I think it was last summer in July. I don't know why I remember that it was in July, but it was last summer in July. I happened to be working on the weekend, and a resident came up and said the same thing, that she was out on the property with a friend that she had just made. I don't know who the person was, but her abuser found her and the friend, and the friend was a gentleman, the abuser was a gentleman. So the two of them were arguing in the street. And so she called me and said, I need help, basically. And so I was actually able to diffuse the situation, and the abuser left. It just depends person to person. There are some abusers, this doesn't make sense, but there are some abusers who actually do have a respect for the law. And so if you say, hey, I'm calling the police, or this is private property, you can't be here, I would consider it trespassing. They have a respect for the law and they will leave. There are some abusers who have absolutely no respect for the law, and they don't care one way or the other whether you're going to call the police or not. I have friends that work in shelters in bigger, like more metropolitan areas, and they have more incidents in the metropolitan areas than we do in rural Missouri, of abusers showing up, really are going to shoot up the town. They show up, they're aggressive, they mean business, somebody's going to get hurt. I know of stories of abusers that have broken into shelters, that have climbed over, like they're like gated communities, that have climbed over gates and everything else. And so most of those end up with a 911 phone call and somebody being arrested. So, I mean, just as every person that you meet on the street is different, every scenario is going to be different. We're just lucky enough, I think, because we are in a rural area, that most of the time when an abuser does show up, we can have the conversation like I told you, and then say, and this is private property and you need to leave. It doesn't always work. It works probably, and I'm just making this number up right now, so I don't have any statistical data to back it up, but that works probably 85% of the time, to be honest with you. And so it works for us at the crisis center basically to provide our own security. It doesn't work in the bigger metropolitan areas, I don't think, for them to try to provide their own security. So I will never forget my very first year working at the crisis center. I was months into the job, and I may have told this story before. Months into the job, I was the court advocate, and I was working with a woman who was involved in not only a situation where she had filed for an order of protection, but there was also a child custody case going on. And I was familiar with the woman. I was familiar with her daughter. I'd taken them to court. I knew them as well as you can know somebody, you know, in that advocacy role. One night, late at night, 10:30, something like that, I got a phone call on my home phone. And this was before caller ID and all of that stuff. So the phone rings, you answer it. I answered the phone, and it happened to be the abuser of the person that I was working with. And he was very upset, and wanting to basically tell me his side of the story. And he was alluding to the situation's not all one-sided, talking about how she was abusive too, talking about how he wasn't sure that his daughter being with the mother was in the best interest of the child. He got very upset. He got very loud. He was a person who, when he got angry, he would stutter. And so the angrier he got, the more that he stuttered. And so a lot of the conversation that I had with him was trying to diffuse it, trying to bring it down, trying to help him get past the anger. The bottom line, though, was even in still in that conversation, I can't confirm or deny the person's presence. I wouldn't say, yes, I know who she is. Yes, I know who your daughter is. Even though he had seen me with her at court, he knew who I was and I knew who he was. But I still maintained that confidentiality as much as I could. And eventually it was an hour-long conversation, I think, when it was all said and done. But I was able to diffuse it enough that he didn't do anything crazy when he got off the phone. Of course, the next day I called the telephone company and got an unlisted phone number. So that was the lesson that I learned in that scenario. But you know, in addition to all of those things, we see abusers all of the time. We have situations where we've talked before that a woman leaves her home an average of 6 to 8 times before she leaves for good. Where does she go when she leaves? A lot of times she returns back to her abuser. I live in small town USA. If I go to Walmart, if I go to the local grocery store, it is not uncommon for me to see someone who was in our shelter with their abuser. In that scenario, we have no interaction whatsoever, because in my mind, it's not safe for that woman if I go up and talk to her. It's also a violation of her confidentiality. And typically what happens when they see me, they go the other way. Because you know, they don't want to have that conversation.
Right.
And so unfortunately, I've even been able to observe some bad behavior where that resident or former resident may be in a public place with the abuser, and I've witnessed abusers talking down to or talking loudly to, you know, or whatever else someone. In that scenario, I can't do anything about it because I'm bound by confidentiality to that woman. And so if I jump in and try to help in that situation, I violate her confidentiality. And so that's challenging for me sometimes because, of course, what I want to do is go say, hey, you can't talk to her like that. But I can't. Legally, I can't. I'd be breaking the law if I did that. So that part's challenging. And then I think I told you the story one time where a friend of mine and my son were shopping, and the guy came in and started yelling at the woman at the cash register. The day that I got involved and decided to tell him that I worked for the sheriff's department. So that was a more of a heated interaction that I was able to kind of diffuse in an interesting way. So, you know, it's life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. You know, it's that kind of a scenario. And, you know, it can be, you know, in the courtroom when you see someone at the courthouse, every single time I've ever gone with a victim of domestic violence into the courtroom setting, the person that we're met with is very polite and very, very soft-spoken and very professional because they're in a situation where they're about to be before the judge. And so I can't say every time, honestly. There's been a couple of times where they acted out and we've had to call the bailiff and we've had to remove ourselves from the situation. So that's not even accurate. So most of the time in the courtroom setting, it's the public persona that we're met with. But there have been a few times where we've had to call the bailiff. We've had to be in a different room while they escort him out or whatever else. And so even in that scenario, now that I'm thinking about it, we've had that issue happen as well.
Wow.
So that's, the A to Z answer really is A to Z. It runs the whole gamut. You really never know what you're going to get. Our first response is always, I'm going to be polite. I'm going to be respectful. If you're going to be polite and respectful back to me, we'll have a positive exchange. If you're going to be a jerk, I'm going to call the police. Like, that's the way that goes down. And so, it's the police's job to deal with things like that, not mine. So I will interact as long as I possibly can without having to do that. But, when the rubber hits the road, if that person wants to be abusive or aggressive or whatever else, I'm just going to call the police and let the police handle it.
So what was that like when you had to get a hold of the bailiff? I mean, it just narrowed down to maybe one instance. So this guy's literally acting out in the courthouse. I mean, what an idiot.
Yeah, I mean, we've had people actually sit in the courtroom for a full order hearing, and he's staring at her like evil eyes and muttering and mouthing things, and she's getting more upset and more uncomfortable. And so it's just a matter of walking over to the bailiff and saying, he's tormenting her, and so can he be removed, can she be removed, or whatever else. There's been times where an abuser, and I've seen this happen as well, an abuser has gotten very upset about the decision the judge made or whatever else, screaming and yelling. There was a situation, I wasn't the court advocate at the time, but my former court advocate was involved in it, where the guy was screaming and yelling in the open courtroom, threatening the person, and was arrested in the courtroom because he was threatening the victim, who was there filing for an order of protection. And he was trying to defend himself, saying she doesn't need an order of protection, and ended up going to jail that day because he acted out in front of everybody. And there's been other scenarios where it's happened outside on the courthouse grounds. Like, those kind of things very much do happen. And there's been times, especially talking to the bailiff, now that I'm going back in the recesses of my brain,
Right.
where we've said, we're going to sit in here. Can you watch and make sure that he leaves? Because I don't want him to see my car and I don't want him to follow us.
Right.
I mean, there have been times where people have tried to follow us. And so we turn around and we go back to the police station. Go ahead and follow us here. And that's a good way to detract someone from continuing that behavior. So you really just never know what you're going to get.
Wow. I was laughing because I'm thinking you're acting like a maniac in the courtroom while your wife or girlfriend is trying to get an order of protection, and you're just simply proving that she needs an order of protection.
Right.
Doesn't matter what you say that she doesn't need it. You're showing
Right.
that she needs this.
Right.
What an idiot.
And so that particular person got thrown in jail and then served with papers.
Good.
Because I think that was for an ex parte hearing. Got served with papers for the full order. I can't quite remember the logistics of which one she was applying for, but anyway, yeah, he got served papers in jail.
I love it. I love it. And that's the way it should be. The women
Absolutely.
should be victim. I shouldn't say just a woman, but the victim, whether it's a man or a woman, should be protected, period.
Yeah.
That's what the legal
So, I mean, that's a big role of the court advocate, is to become familiar with the courtroom personnel. And the bailiff is one of the very first people. When I train a new court advocate, the bailiff is one of the very first people I say, that's going to be your best friend, and you need to get to know that person. Because if you've ever been in a courtroom, you can't just get up and walk over and talk to the bailiff. That's not proper courtroom procedure. It's not proper behavior. But with the court advocate, if they know them well enough, they could even say, will you come talk to me? And because they know each other, the bailiff will do that. And so there's ways, building those relationships are super important in that particular scenario.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
And so we have interactions with abusers all of the time. We just do. I mean, that's just the reality of it. There's no such thing in my mind anymore as a hidden location when it comes to shelters. Google Earth has made that pretty well impossible. And so if somebody's wanting to find you, they're going to find you. And so we have interactions with abusers all of the time. Some of them aren't so bad. Some of them are.
Had any of them at your shelter that they've, to use a phrase, that they have come in just, whooping it up and shooting up, trying to shoot up the town? I mean, how bad is
We've
it?
had doors kicked in. We've had things like that happen before.
Wow.
And in fact, way back when I first started working and we used hotel placement, we've actually had, and I don't know if the victim of the abuse had been talking on the phone and accidentally said something. We've even had people found in hotels before. So, and those typically are not near as, well, we don't use hotel placement anymore, but one particular incident I'm thinking of was not a great incident at all. And he did some damage actually to the hotel room.
Wow.
Yeah.
So then was he responsible for what he did, or was the crisis center responsible?
He was responsible for what he did. The crisis center didn't do that.
Okay, good,
Yeah.
good. Wow. And then did you have any interaction with the guy that tore up the hotel room?
I saw him in court. Because I took his wife to court following that. I saw him in court. And other than speaking angrily in my direction in the courtroom, I mean, there really wasn't much interaction between he and I at that point. Yeah. And in fact, I saw him in court, I think before he kicked in the door in the hotel room. Because she was there initially for an ex parte order protection, and that's then came back for the full order, and I saw him in court for the full order. And he kind of showed out a little bit even that day in court, not bad enough that anything happened, but he was definitely like belligerent and aggressive on that particular day.
In front of the judge? I mean,
In front of the judge. So the judge had to call him down a couple of times, but didn't arrest him or didn't throw him in jail or anything like that, but definitely called him down a few times. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So I'm just gonna take a little bit of a rabbit trail here. So with your psychology background, what do you see in that kind of a behavior when they are willing to act out in front of the judge? What does that tell you?
They're an abuser. They're an abuser. There might be some sociopathic behaviors coming out in that respect. There's some narcissism that's coming out in that respect, because that that narcissistic behavior of an abuser says I'm above the law, and so the rules don't apply to me, and so I can speak to you however I want to speak to you, and I can act however I want to act in your direction. And so and there's no respect for the law obviously in that scenario. So the fact that they're willing to show out, how do I say this the right way? The fact that they're willing to show out, they're not motivated to cover up and be that positive public persona person, so to speak. They're willing to cross that line. Some of those walls that should be up, they've brought down, and they're willing just to act out. I think there's a lot of narcissism that goes along with that, honestly. Probably more narcissism than sociopathic behavior now that I think about it. Just that whole, and abusers conduct themselves in that way, that they are above the law, the rules don't apply to them, they can say whatever they want and do whatever they want. And so there is that lack of respect for authority. So they're going to challenge that authority and push that bar as far as they can push it, I think. And then there are the people that are worried about their public persona. And so they're going to, yes, sir, no, sir, whatever you say, sir. And they're going to be like that in the courtroom. So again, you really just never know what you're going to get.
I know that we've talked about it before, and it doesn't scare you, it doesn't rattle you to have to deal with them, because they are very clearly going against the law by being on your private property, from acting out towards this woman that you're trying to protect by having her there on your property. How about new staff when they come on? Is that a little bit of a challenge when you're?
It can be. I think new staff sometimes, if they're met with that type of behavior, it can shake them up a little bit. I mean, we prepare people for that. You know, we have a similar conversation and training to a new person. With a new person, you never know what you're going to get. But the bottom line is, we actually hold all the power in that scenario. That abuser has no power over us whatsoever. And so that's what I always say. The second you feel like you're not safe, you call 911. I don't care.
Yeah.
You will be protected.
Mhm.
And so I'm sure the first interaction or so that a new employee has in that respect can be tough, maybe a little scary, maybe a little intimidating, but I think the rest of the staff rallies around people in that situation. And then of course we're going to process it. Let's talk about what happened. What did you do? What did that person say? What did they do? So then if it ever happens again, they're more prepared. It's hard to train somebody how to behave in that situation because again, you never know what you're going to get. So we'll prepare them and say, you could be met with a belligerent person on our property. But what I always say is, don't interact. You call the cops. You let the cops take care of it. Make sure, tell her to go back in a cottage and lock the door and you call 911, or whatever that happens to be. We'll let the police take care of the hard part. And we've had abusers arrested right on our property and they drive away in the cop car. Like we've had that happen lots of times.
That's got to feel good.
Yeah. I'd be lying if I told you there haven't been a few times I've been pretty excited to see handcuffs slapped on a person.
Imagine. But what about when you started? Was that intimidating to go head to head with these guys?
No,
Never
I've
was?
never been intimidated by things like that. But also my prior job before working at the crisis center, I worked at a residential facility with teenagers with behavior problems. And so I already had my fill experience of working in cottages with teenage boys where the teenage boys get mad and they go after each other and I step in the middle and break up the fight. Same respect to teenage girls that do the same thing. And I've always been the idiot that's going to step in the middle and break up the fight. And so that's not something that I've ever personally been intimidated by. I guess because my attitude has always been, I'm not the target of your aggression. Even when the two teenage boys would go after each other, I'm not the target of the aggression. So I'm going to step in and say, wait a minute, what can I do to de-escalate whatever the situation is? So if I felt like I was the target, I think that would change. Because if I'm going to be the target of aggression, I'm going to be intimidated and I'm going to feel nervous and I'm going to be apprehensive about that situation. But logically, if I look at it and I know that I'm not the target of that aggression, it really hasn't been something that's bothered me before.
That's really awesome. And then your leadership style and role like that and your mindset is a great example, living example for your staff to learn and to go, oh, yeah, you know what? She's right. I don't have to be afraid of this guy.
Yeah.
Because we are in the right and we've got the law behind
Yeah.
us.
And they've watched me do it before where I'll be sitting in my office and I'll hear something and I don't know what I'm hearing, but I know I'm hearing it. And I'll step out of my office and you've seen the building. I'll walk down the hallway and go to the front door and say, I hear fighting going on by cottage number 9. And I'll go out there. Like I'm not going to wait and say, hey, you go out there and you go take care of that. And sometimes it might be two residents fighting, or it might be a pair of kids get into an argument and I can't see it. I can just hear it. And so that our cottage, no, our property is not an environment where we tolerate that kind of behavior. And so they've seen me numerous times fly out of my office and run out the door and see what I can take care of. And so I try to lead through example in those situations as well, but constantly reminding people, even if they call, hey, this thing's going on and they're at the office in the shelter right now and they're not sure how to handle the situation. I will always be the voice of reason that says, okay, this is the steps you take. Remember, you're not the object of the aggressor. They're not mad at you. You have a role to fill. Your role is to protect this resident. And so you need to figure out what you need to do to protect that resident. And if it's you bring the resident into the office and you lock the door, and you have the ability to do that, bring the resident in the office and you lock the door. You know, we process through how do we safety plan around that for the advocates as well. And I've gotten phone calls even where I've had employees tell me we have 2 residents who are making me feel unsafe, and they'll tell me why they feel unsafe. And that's the directive I give: lock the door, tell everybody to go to their cottages and you lock the door. I don't want you sitting in an office with the doors unlocked, feeling threatened right now. And we've had residents in our shelter threaten staff before. And so that's how I tell them to handle it. You go in and you lock the door. In the light of day, when there's several of us there, we will address that and we'll take care of the situation. But if you don't feel safe right now, lock yourself in.
Wow. That had to have been a misunderstanding of some sort on the part of the
No,
resident.
no,
Nope.
we've had a couple of residents that have been aggressive in staff's direction. We don't always say things that people like to hear.
Yeah.
Or there may have been a dispute with somebody else and they didn't like how that outcome went.
Mhm.
And so they've turned on staff, or whatever else. And so we've had some threats. That's just the right word for it. Threats made in our direction as far as being staff members go, but
Mhm.
we'll deal with those too.
I just love that mindset that it doesn't rattle you. You just literally take one moment at a time. And that's got to be such an amazing role model for your staff to follow,
I
honestly.
hope so. I hope
Yeah.
so.
Those are the kind of bosses I loved working for. They didn't mind going in and cleaning the toilets. They didn't mind going in and doing whatever. I mean, there was no job too low for them. Yes,
Mhm.
they might have a role of manager or whatever the title was, but they would do anything and everything just like we did. Those are
Yeah,
the people, man, I'll do anything for you.
yeah.
Mhm.
Well, and that's what I always tell my staff. I'm never going to ask you to do something that I'm not willing to do myself. And there have been times in dealing with those types of crises where I've said, this is what I want you to do. And the staff member has said, I feel very uncomfortable doing that. And then I have said, I'll go do it. And I have, like, I'll go do it. Like, I have never been afraid to have those conversations. I've never been afraid to have those conversations.
That's awesome.
And I'm not the only one. And I don't want to present that as I'm the only one, because there are plenty of people on my staff that are also not afraid to have those conversations. But yeah.
Wow. That is just so impressive.
Well, the thing you got to keep in mind, and what I always tell people, is we're dealing with people in crisis.
Yeah.
And when people are in crisis, people don't act the same way they act when they're not in crisis. And so it's silly to think that a resident staying in our shelter who has come out of a horrifically abusive situation where a person has said, I love you, and then that person has done everything but kill them, basically, and, might be willing to kill them if the situation arose. Why would we be surprised if that person acts like they're in crisis? And so something happens, and I say we've had residents threaten our staff. They're in crisis. And so when you're in that fight or flight and you decide to turn around and fight, it's going to come across as threatening to the staff. But even in those scenarios, most of the time, I can't say 100% of the time, but most of the time, it's not about us.
Right.
It's not about us. And so that's the main thing that I constantly tell my staff. It's not about you. Yes, they're angry. Yes, they're yelling in your direction. It's not about you. And so if we can remove ourselves from that, and one, it makes it easier to deal with that right from the start. But then we do have a team of people who are willing to, hey, I got your back. And so if you don't want to go down and have that conversation by yourself, I'm going to come with you. Or if you don't know how to deal with the fact that there's an abuser in there. And really, you need to talk to my advocates as far as interactions with abusers, because my advocates have great stories about abusers hiding in the cottages and the places they found the abusers.
Oh, I hear those stories. Oh.
So the one The one advocate went down to the cottage one time and the abuser was hiding behind the curtains, but the feet were sticking out. Like one time there was an abuser hiding under the bed, and the bed was very low to the ground anyway. And so the advocate knew if she sat on the bed, there's no way the guy was coming out of there. And she sat right on the bed, right on top of him. Like and said, "You need to come out of here and you need to leave our premises." So we do
Oh,
have some fun things like that happen too.
oh, I want to hear that. I know we've talked about how we're going to have your staff on. So we'll give folks a little teaser on that. I can't wait to hear those stories. Those will be
Yeah.
good.
Ask some of those stories. They have way better stories about that kind of stuff than I do.
That's incredible. So how dangerous has it ever gotten for you personally? Have you ever felt like you were in danger?
One time, and I don't know that I felt like I was in danger as much as I felt like I was really stupid. I was like,
Okay.
"You're an idiot. Why are you in this position right now? You're an idiot." And so I was a brand spanking new court advocate, months old, and there was a situation with a woman. So Taney County used to have night court on Thursday nights.
Oh wow.
And so it was super crowded. It was like roll call. So there was everything under the sun that would happen in night court. So there was no like, we're going to do all the orders of protection now. We're going to do this. No, it was just as your name was called, your case was dealt with. And so I was there with a woman whose husband was physically abusive. He'd threatened to burn her house down before. And I've told you the story about the woman, I think. Anyway, threatened to burn her house down. Anyway, she was there. She was staying in our shelter. She was in a hotel. We had to go for the full order. And while we were at the full order, she had requested to the judge that she get some of her personal property. She didn't know whether the abuser was in the home or not in the home. He was supposed to not be in the home, but she couldn't confirm or deny that one way or the other. When her case came before the judge, it was about 9:45 at night. We'd been there since 6 o'clock. That's how long it took us to actually get to her case. We get to her case. The judge does give her her order of protection. Also in the order of protection, he awards her some of these items that she wanted from the home. I'm brand new. I'm really brand new, literally a couple of months old. The judge looks at me and he says, "She's entitled to go to her home and get these items. Can you facilitate that for me?" I'm a brand new advocate. Yeah, I can. I want to make a good impression on the judge. He doesn't really know me from Adam. I said, "I absolutely can." "Can you do that tonight?" "Yes, sir, I can." So now it's 10 o'clock at night. I don't know if you don't know anything about Taney County. Taney County is full of very many small villages and townships,
Yes.
very remote, lots of areas that are woodsy, etc. This particular person lived way out in Taney County, out in the boonies, in a trailer that was on one side of the trailer completely woods. There was a trailer here and a few other trailers smattered throughout, and that was it. Happened to be a night. It was a dark night. There was no moon. It was dark. We find her house. It's pitch black out. There's nothing. You step out of the car, it's completely quiet. The only way that she could see to open the doorknob of her house was if I left the headlights on the car, because it was that dark. This was before the days where everybody carried cell phones. There was no like turn your phone on so you can see. My headlights are on, and she's pointing toward the house so she can go in. She made the statement to me on the way there, "I hope he's not in the house," because he could be laying in wait for me to come into the house. So I'm prepared for that. So as I'm standing there by the car, watching her unlock the door, I look over and all I see is woods and it's completely dark. I look over, it's completely dark and there's not a soul out, and it's just she and I. She's going into this house where she's not 100% convinced that the abuser is not laying in wait to harm her. And I said to myself, You're an idiot. What are you doing? One, you really have, Becky, you've put yourself in harm's way. This is not safe. But not only have I put myself in harm's way and it's not safe, I've put this woman in harm's way and it's not safe. And my enthusiasm to do what the judge had requested me to do, because it's the first time the judge had ever spoken to me, the first time the judge ever asked me to do anything, I wanted to make a good impression. I said yes. What I should have said was, yes, Your Honor, I absolutely can do that. Can I do that in the morning? That's what I should have said. Or, as now that I'm educated, I could have said, could we have a police escort? I didn't. I was brand new. I'm telling you, I was when I say months, that's an exaggeration. It was weeks. Like, I was brand new. Anyway, thank goodness. So I had that moment of, you're an idiot. This is not safe. Anyway, nothing happened. She was able to go into the house. She was able to gather her belongings. And then I took her back to the hotel and everything was fine.
Good.
The next day, I go to my director and she says, how was court last night? And I tell her what happened in court last night. And she didn't use these words, but she said, you're an idiot. She didn't call me an idiot, but that's the really good lesson to learn as a brand new advocate, because every scenario that happened after that, now I had tools.
Yeah.
I knew that wasn't safe. I knew that I could ask for police accompaniment. I knew that I could go during the light of day. There was all kinds of these things that I had to learn off the cuff, fly by the seat of my pants. So I don't know that I was scared, but I definitely thought I'd made a horrible decision. And there was a fear factor of, what if he's in there?
Yeah.
What am I going to do to protect her?
Yeah.
And if I can't protect her, I sure as heck can't protect myself. This was a really bad choice.
Yeah.
And so I've used that particular story in training lots of times on, this is why we have a rule blanket policy at the crisis center where we say you cannot go to the home that the abuser shared with the victim. You can't do it.
Oh, that's good.
No, we will make exceptions. I need to go get this thing, and I know for a fact that the abuser works from this time to this time. Even then, we're leery about it. Typically, what we do is we'll go to a public place. We basically have a policy that says we don't go to that home. I don't want to put my advocates in danger.
Right.
Now, in the world that we live in, my court advocate can say, hey, could we have police accompaniment or whatever else? And so that's kind of the way that we usually work those things out. So, but that was I made a horrible mistake.
Wow. You had me sitting on the edge of my seat and I'm trying to breathe, telling myself, take a breath,
Yeah.
while you telling this story. Yeah.
So thankfully everything worked out okay, and I didn't have to learn the lesson the hard way.
Right.
But it was a good lesson to learn.
Wow. Yeah. Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely very good lesson. Well, we are now 48 minutes into this episode.
Wow. You hear my dog barking in the background?
I can. Don't worry about him. Don't worry about him at all.
He's got something to say too.
Yeah, he does. He must know about the abusers that he's been around.
I guess so.
Becky, thank you. I love to pick your brain. I love to hear stories. And my reason for this is so our viewers understand that what you do is not just this quiet little boring job where you sit behind a computer and you say, yes, ma'am, I can help you. And this is what you can do. And you give them directions. It's not that way at all.
It's nothing like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, nothing like that.
And so I want to get in future episodes, I want to get into a little bit of exactly what all of you do. And I think maybe when we have your staff would be a really good time to bring that out. I want to build a knowledge base of for our viewers to know just exactly what you do. That, you know, yes, you support them and you help train them and educate them as to what domestic violence is and all sorts of angles. I don't even want to get into a list of it right now, but yes, you do that. but you also do so much more that I don't think any of us are really truly aware of what you come up to, up against on a daily
Right. Yeah, I'm sure that's very true.
basis.
Yeah, it was a good question.
So maybe for another episode, you can think about an answer for this one. Were you aware of all the things that you were going to be needed to fulfill on the job? That would be a good question for another episode.
That is a good question. So if you see somebody, their hands up like this, they fold their thumb inside their palm and they cover it with their four fingers. That is an international, I guess we should call it, probably cry for help of help me, I need out. And so, the thumb would be representative of the person who's needing the help. The fingers over the top are I'm being trafficked or kidnapped, held against my will, or I'm in danger from this person who is an abuser and I'm needing to get away. This is a cry for, can you help me? Can you call the police? Can you somehow get me away from this person that I'm with?
Well, folks, we thank you so much for joining us tonight. And we are going to call it quits for this episode, but we appreciate you being here. Remember to like, subscribe, share, you know how all that goes. And also remember that no matter where you are in this process, you're always free to soar.